one thing that's been helping me that I thought I would like to bring, and it's something that's been very meaningful for me, and I hope it has some resonance for you. But in the suttas, if you've never heard that term or don't know exactly what it means, these are the recorded teachings of the historical Buddha that were recorded after his passing in India. And these suttas are generally conversations or teachings. And, reading them, you can tell by the way there's a lot of repetition. And if you were reading them in the original language, you'd notice a lot of alliteration. These things were chanted for thousands, 2,400-ish years as a mnemonic device, as a way to hold on to them and not forget. And this is very traditional in India. For some reason, there wasn't a lot of writing things down. In China and other places, Syria, the Near and Middle East, a lot more writing things down. But for some reason in India, they trusted their memory. They would hear something. This is the ancient tradition of the Vedas in Hinduism, this recitation of these ancient texts, these ancient prayers and rituals, and then philosophical treatises called the Upanishads. And these. So it was just a thing in India where they're like, writing things down is for grocery lists. Really important things you hear from your teacher, and you memorize them, and you chant them over and over again, and you pass them on. So anyway, eventually, thankfully, they got written down. So these suttas are conversations and teachings, and there's quite a few suttas where the Buddha is trying to ease his students into an understanding of what is often called Anatta, or non-self. And you probably, if you've encountered Buddhism online or in a book, it's very possible that you've come across this idea that, there's no self in Buddhism, or the Buddha taught there was no self. And it's maybe not that simple. But it's safe to say that the Buddha promoted an understanding of selfhood that was a lot less fixed and a lot more flexible than a lot of the religious traditions of the greater world. And I was reading this story, and there's a couple times where he does this, or a couple different places. You find this in the suttas. So once upon a time, because that's how all good stories start. Once upon a time, the Buddha and his students are sitting in this beautiful mango grove. And the Buddha says, "Monks," and they all perk up. So you're going to get a teaching, how it is in stories. It says, we're sitting here in this grove, and this grove has hundreds of mango trees, and these trees have hundreds of mangoes, and these mango trees have hundreds of leaves. And you see, we're sitting on these beds of leaves, thousands and thousands of leaves. If someone were to come and take away all the mango trees, would you think, "Oh no, they're taking away myself"? And they're like, "No, of course not, that's silly." Ah, yes. What if they came and took away all the mangoes? Would you think, "Oh no, they're taking away myself"? No, that's ridiculous, of course. Ah, yes. He says, but reflect on the ways that we impart selfhood into things that have nothing to do with ourselves. This is a habitual thing that humans like to do. We impart importance and identity, self-identity, into all these things that have no self-identity. Like the way I dress, for instance. Oh, I would never dress like that. I would only dress like this, and it becomes part of my identity. Or things like the music we like. Or things like the sports team that we follow. That's a lot of selfing right there. Especially if you're, either American football or, World Cup soccer, or, I guess football, the way the entire rest of the world calls football. or politics, or even religion. So much really strong selfing. Or even, the names that we call ourselves in terms of various kinds of our identities. And all of these things, especially as you maybe get a little closer to our lived experience, can be really helpful and really useful. I mean, remembering that all language and all signs and all symbols are just methods of compassion, methods of convenience. Somebody knows you and they're your friend, they say, hey, you want a coffee? You say yes. And if they know how you like your coffee and they bring it to you, that's so sweet. It's an expression of compassion and knowing you on a, for me as somebody who loves coffee, knowing me on a real level, like, oh, sweet and creamy, I don't care what it is, thank you, like, this is great. Especially with family and friends, loved ones, we know that person and we know how they take their coffee or their tea, and we know that they're habitually very hot or very cold or whatever it is. But all of these methods, all of these ways of understanding who we are all contingent. They arise due to causes and conditions and experiences. They're temporary. I have teenagers, and none of them have ever said to me yet, this isn't a phase, Dad, this is who I am. They just do their phases, and I just kind of, my 15-year-old now has holes in his nose. And I can't say anything because I was doing the same thing when I was his age. So, and the music he listens to is profoundly important to him. And he can even identify, looking at other kids walking around town, he'll say, oh, that kid's a mincer, which is a kind of this tiny little subgenre of music called mincecore. When he's looking at a kid, oh, that's a grindcore kid. You can tell by the kind of clothing he wears. And it's really serious business. I'm like, oh, do you know him? He's like, no, I don't know him. We don't listen to the same music. I don't know that clown, I'm like, oh, okay. So, while on the one hand, it would seem really ridiculous if somebody said, oh, if somebody took the leaves from this tree you're sitting under, would you think they took you away? Like, that's silly. That's ridiculous. I'd never think that. Okay. But all these ways that we define ourselves in our ordinary life that seem a lot closer to who we are, the kinds of cars we drive, the kinds of bumper stickers we have, even down to like foods we eat. Now, of course, there's like, if I eat that, I'm going to be in pain later. I'm smarter than that now because I've done it a few times or whatever it is. But so much of how we define ourselves is just absolutely contingent, transitory, temporary, fungible. And the Buddha is inviting his students to really examine, just keep moving, keep moving the lens, keep moving the microscope and see how far down you go. Even, things like making decisions about the kinds of feelings I have from moment to moment. And it's not even, again, there's nothing wrong with music, there's nothing wrong with liking what you like and not liking what you don't like, or eating what agrees with you, or dressing how you want to dress. But it's the clinging that happens, and that clinging is the selfing. This is a really interesting thing about the Buddha. He treats self like a verb, much more so than a noun. In traditional Hinduism and Jainism, which were very prominent in the time of the Buddha, there's this Sanskrit word, ahankara, which is the self as a kind of an illusory figure, like we think it's like the traditional idea in Hinduism is once you see the self, once you see the illusion of the self, you can kind of get past it. The Buddha much more has an idea of self as a verb, selfing. He calls it I-making and mind-making. So this whole long thing, because I'm a geek for this kind of stuff, all of this was just to get us to this point where I've started, a big portion of my practice in my life is noticing when I'm making decisions about things in my life that I don't need to. And even when I'm defining myself in contrast to someone I see when I don't need to. And I keep catching myself. And it's like the picture in my head is like a puppy. They chew on the couch, and they chew on a shoe, and they chew on this. And like, hey, drop it, that's not yours. And that's what I've started to say to myself. I notice when I grab on, like I see, some bumper sticker for some political persuasion that I don't care for, and I'm like, and I know all about that person. And I'm like, that's not yours. What are you doing? Let it go. Drop it. Just, and it's amazing how often I do it. I mean, I spend a considerable portion of my waking life defining myself in contrast or in consonance with things and people I see. And I'm, in a way, constructing a self. I'm I-making and mind-making. I see something I like, I'm like, oh yeah, that's good. Oh, it's good. Wow, that's amazing that I have that skill. I know I can declare this is good.
Okay.
And I get to define myself in this way. This is good and I like it. That means I'm good. And I'm done. Until the next time I do it. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. And this is something that, is something that I find myself doing on the cushion too. I sit down and I'm very peaceful and very gathered. I'm like, oh yes, this is good. This is how I am. And I've just created this whole experience in this whole self. I'm Franz who meditates very peacefully. And that's fine. Again, I want to make sure I get that across. That's great that you're meditating peacefully. It's not who I am. It's not, you go sit and you have a terrible. You sit and there's a lot of agitation. And then, I'm a bad meditator, capital B, capital M, and you're on a poster at the post office, bad meditator. You're no such thing. You are this ungraspable patterning of energy in the cosmos at large, which is an ungraspable patterning of energy. And 1,000 times, even in a moment, you'll feel this way and that way and this way and that way. And all of them are perfectly fine. It's the I-making and mind-making that gets problematic, gets me into trouble. And this goes for my personal relationships, or even, when that person gets out of that truck with the bumper sticker that indicates what kind of person they are, I don't like them. And they smile at me and I go, because I'm not friends with those kinds of people. It's, and then even just like I said, so that same kind of I-making and mind-making, seeing yourself in contrast to whatever that is that you don't care for. And again, you don't have to like spicy Thai food like I do. That's fine. You get to like what you like and don't like what you don't like. But I just want to invite you, especially on the cushion, but also in your whole life, to just notice. Maybe you're making a self that doesn't need to be there. It's totally optional. You can just be open and available to your experience from moment to moment. And maybe these things get, well, not maybe, they do. Maybe these things get habitual and ingrained. And over 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 90 years, you could have spent your whole life being an open and available, ungraspable patterning of energy, open to whatever life is presenting from moment to moment. It would be a shame to miss that in favor of being a rigid, hard, inflexible, fixed self who's like this or like that. So, said that, all relationships are fundamentally empty, and this is a foundational teaching running from the Buddha all the way through. This goes, the relationships are empty. Shocker, guys. All people are empty, all things are empty, and empty of what is the follow-up question. Empty of any inherent, lasting essence. And this might not sound like good news. This is like what you get for getting into Buddhism. Hey, I'm bringing you the good news of Buddhism. What is it? You're empty. Wow. I already felt like a jerk. Now awesome. Thanks a lot, buddy. But the good news, the good news of that is, if there's no lasting fixed identity or essence, guess what? You get to make one, or you get to decide what the meaning of a thing is for you. This is like, I don't know if you've ever seen this comic, but there's two people riding in a bus, and one person's looking out the window and smiling. Let me do it the other way. And one person's looking out the window and frowning, and they're like, everything's meaningless. And the person sitting next to them is looking out the window and smiling, everything's meaningless. There is no inherent meaning already handed to you at birth. Guess what? You get to decide. You get to invest. You are a meaning-making machine. The cosmos as conscious being. The comment was, it sounds like you're doing a lead into the 3 marks of existence, or the 3 marks, which, if you don't know what they are or haven't heard them, these are the 3 big things that the Buddha felt like were his big ways of conceptualizing his realization. That nothing has a lasting or fixed essence or self. In Sanskrit, this word svabhava it's so beautiful. Sanskrit has so many incredible words that have this rich cloud of meaning that we don't have any word like it in English. So a self-essence. Swa means self, and bhava means essence. So nothing has a self-essence. Everything is empty. Why? Because anicca, everything is changing constantly. Everything is constantly in flux, even if you can't see it. And many teachers, this is their big way in. This is the way they want people to train. Think of imagine you're sitting and you're just, for whatever reason, I don't know, somebody cut you off on the way to the meditation center and then took your parking spot, and then you had to walk 6 blocks, and you get in there and you stub your toe, and then you can't get your good cushion or whatever, and you sit down and that's great. That's not a problem. That's a beautiful Dharma gate. You can go right in. Why? Try to stay that mad for your whole sit. See what happens. Try to stay that just enraged for the whole... Oh, I forgot I was mad. Hold on. Everything is constantly changing. Everything's in flux. Nothing is fixed. And that's a great way in. And then, of course... Dukkha, suffering or stress, unease. Because, why? Because if you try to live like you are a fixed substance with a self-essence or anything around you or any relationship, you're going to suffer. And if you try to live in a world that doesn't change, you're going to suffer. Anicca and Anatta, change, flow, whatever, and non-self aren't a problem. Don't make dukkha happen unless you make it happen. You cannot hold on to a constantly flowing, shifting, ungraspable patterning of energy. And if you try, you're just going to be disappointed. You're just going to make suffering for yourself and probably people around you. How many people in this room have been told, well, you changed? Or, I thought you wanted that. Or, insert whatever you were told by somebody. Guess what? So, all right, it's time to sit.